Bill Donohue is next, but first, the Catholic Diocese of Madison, Wisconsin announced this week they may file suit against the city and county if their parishes are not allowed to reopen at the same capacity as retail outlets. Under the county's current plan, businesses are permitted to operate at 25% capacity, while churches will be limited to 50 people regardless of the size of their buildings. Madison Bishop Donald Hying had this to say: "In the wake of the coronavirus pandemic and the racial injustice of the past week, our community is crying out for unity, for grace, and for spiritual healing. We are ready and able to answer that call, but the 50-person cap has unjustly stifled our pastoral mission." The diocese issued a June 3rd letter, also signed by attorneys from the Becket Fund, indicating their position. Joining us now with more analysis of some of the stories we reported earlier, we're pleased to be joined by Bill Donohue, president of the Catholic League. Bill, as I reported earlier, an officer was stabbed and 2 were shot last night in Brooklyn. Things seem to be calming down a bit over the last day or so. What's the feeling in New York? And your thoughts on the changing face of these protests and the reaction of New York authorities?
Well, most of the people I've spoken to, it's a sense of exasperation and bewilderment. We have a good police force in New York City. Don't anybody doubt that. Unfortunately, we have a mayor who's worse than incompetent. That would be true of the governor. He's worse than incompetent, the mayor, and he's basically told the police to stand down. They had a laughable situation in the night with a curfew that began at 11 p.m. At 11 p.m. They had one that began at 1 p.m. in Santa Monica. And then, of course, things got out of control. You know, if the police are told to stand down, you can't blame them. The authorities are allowing this to happen. And of course, we know that in some cases it's deliberate. That is to say, America needs to burn, America needs to crash. All you have to do is look on the internet, you don't have to listen to me, to see what people are saying, Antifa and others. This is deliberate. Of course, most of the protesters are peaceful. We have to emphasize that. But there's more than just a few. They're not rebel rousers. They're organized. They bring in their power tools. They've got their metal crowbars. They know what they're doing. They have encrypted communication to keep in touch with each other. They know where the police line is thin. They know when to strike, when to torch, when to loot. This is all deliberate. And unfortunately, the peaceful protesters are now being tagged with this byline. Now, listen, when Martin Luther King wrote his great letter from a Birmingham jail, he said that people have to respect the law even when you break it, and that when they come to get you, it has to be nonviolent and you will go lovingly to jail. Now, just counter that with a lot of these kids, very many of them, by the way, are wealthy, affluent white kids. They are not the sons and the daughters of the cops and the firemen. These are the people, the sons and daughters of the corporate elite, the professoriate, and many others. They are the pampered class, and they're the ones who are leading the charge.
Bill, why do you think we're seeing, and this is a disturbing trend here, why do you think we're seeing the targeting of houses of worship by these protesters? Is there an element of anti-religious bigotry that you're seeing in these protests?
Well, why is it that the police and the priests are the most maligned people in American society today, and there's no pushback except from the Catholic League and other quarters? What do they represent? What do houses of worship represent? What do the Boy Scouts represent? Any institution or demographic profile of any people which are associated with the defense of traditional moral values is under attack. That's why. They go after Orthodox Jews, but there's too few of them. They do go after evangelical Protestants. They're too afraid to go after Muslims. The Catholic Church is a big fat target, so they go after us. They won't go after the Methodists and the Lutherans and the Presbyterians and the Episcopalians. They'll go after the Catholic Church, and when they're finished with us, look what de Blasio did. He singled out Orthodox Jews, didn't he? He singled them out for condemnation. He didn't condemn secular Jews. Now, this is all of a piece. Any institution or any demographic group associated with the defense of traditional moral values is under assault in American society, and it begins in higher education.
Bill, there was a huge negative media reaction when protesters were cleared from 16th Street in front of St. John's Church in Washington, the Church of the Presidents. And then when President Trump stopped by that church holding a Bible, heads exploded in the media. This is Episcopal Bishop Marianne Edgar Bood. Listen.
The president just used a Bible, the most sacred text of the Judeo-Christian tradition, and one of the churches of my diocese without permission, nor did he acknowledge the agony of our country right now, and in particular that of the people of color in our nation, who wonder if anyone in public power will ever acknowledge their sacred worth, and who are rightfully demanding an end to 400 years of systemic racism.
He is not a man of prayer on Sunday morning. We know that.
Bill, your reaction?
Well, the left has infused itself and integrated itself into elite quarters in the corporate world, in the clergy, in almost all religions, certainly in the institutions of higher education and even in elementary and secondary, in the entertainment industry, in the media, in the tech world, we know that in Silicon Valley, in the artistic community, wherever you have the dissemination of ideas, you're going to see a left component. And unlike the moderates and unlike the conservatives, they only exist for power. And they hate this president. They don't like him. That's fine. They can vote against him. But what they're doing is that they are using the pulpit for political purposes. Yet it is our side, traditional Catholics, evangelical Protestants, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, and Mormons, who get accused for politicizing our religion. Indeed, it's just the opposite. It's the other side which does it, and they do it with the cheerleading on the media.
Well, I was surprised by the umbrage over the president posing with that Bible, when in front of that church. And the bishop there says, we know he's not a man of prayer. Well, last time I checked, Jesus said everybody can come here. The salvation was for everybody. And in fact, in the picture the president took, right over his shoulder in front of the church, there's a sign and it says, all are welcome. But I guess that doesn't apply to everybody. So it was surprising that that excited so many people in the media, as well as some of the Episcopal authorities there, which frankly, I have to say, I thought was a missed opportunity. The president should have taken a moment and read something from the Bible since he was carrying it. But when Joe Biden spoke with community leaders at an AME church in Wilmington, Delaware, earlier in the week, he had some interesting things to say about police training in the aftermath of George Floyd's death. Listen to this.
We also have to fundamentally change the way in which police are trained. The idea that instead of standing there and teaching a cop who's an unarmed person to coming at him with a knife or something, to shoot him in the leg instead of in the heart, is a very different thing. There's a lot of different things that can change. Yeah.
Bill, why do you think there was such a muted reaction to that outrageous comment inside a church, no less? Shoot a man in the leg.
Well, next they're going to go for his pinky, obviously, or hit him in the left earlobe as such. When politicians try to micromanage the police, we're in deep trouble. Everybody keeps talking about George Floyd, and we should. What happened there was indefensible. It was obscene. But who's talking about David Dorn? Is Biden talking about David Dorn? He's the elderly black cop who was shot the other day, the retired cop in St. Louis for just trying to help people out. Would his name going to be memorialized? Will they be naming things after David Dorn? The average person never heard of David Dorn, but we know of George Floyd. Biden just made some real cheap shots there. Listen, most policemen are good men, and I'm sick and tired of hearing how the Minneapolis police shot George Floyd. They did not. A policeman from Minneapolis shot him, not the police. We don't talk about the blacks, do we? We're talking about a particular black man who may have been engaged in an offense. They make the sweeping negative generalizations about the police, which are scurrilous, the likes of which you would never make about blacks or Hispanics or Indians or Jews or Native Americans or gays or any other group. But it's free for all now to go and get the cops. I've looked at the studies, and others have looked at it too, on police brutality. There is less police brutality today than there has been in decades. And if you take a look at the work of Roland Fryer, a Harvard professor who happens to be black, and he did a study along with many other researchers of 10 major police departments in Texas, California, and Florida, and they found no racial disparity between those cops who went after blacks or whites when it comes to lethal force. We saw the same thing in a study done by professors from Michigan State and Arizona State University. Listen, where police brutality exists, it's an anomaly. It's not common. It's not ongoing. And indeed, this is a malicious lie. And it's dangerous because now we have a whole generation of badly educated young people indoctrinated by their left-wing professors who have grown up to hate the police. I've never seen anything like it. It's, who in the world would want to become a priest or a policeman in this kind of environment when most priests are good men and most policemen are good men, and yet you have this virulent hatred being spewed from the pulpit to the university classroom.
No, your heart breaks certainly for Mr. Floyd, for his family. Look, I have friends who fear encounters with the police. I get it. I mean, I don't understand it personally, but I understand what they're going through. And that is racial bias, racial sensitivity. It's a major issue. But if the march is about police brutality, we do have to look at the data and see how widespread a problem is this, and then how do you address it? And as you said, that is the data. The data is that there's parity, if not, I read one study where more white individuals unarmed are killed by police each year than African Americans. So we've got to look at the totality of that. Bill, let's move on to this story breaking in the Diocese of Brooklyn. The bishop, Anthony DiMarzio, has been accused for a second time of sexual abuse of a minor. Going back nearly 50 years, his attorney denies the charges and says he has uncovered conclusive evidence of the bishop's innocence. What's the backstory here?
The backstory is this. Bishop DiMarzio is a wonderful man who has given his life to the Catholic Church, who's been under attack for a number of years by people in New York and outside of New York because he fought successfully, I was certainly with him, on Cardinal Dolan and others, against unjust discriminatory legislation which allowed the public schools to be totally off the hook when it comes to suspending the statute of limitations for sexual abuse crimes. Finally, they included them, but of course they never went after the public schools. But the point is this. Margaret Markey, she led the charge to allow the public schools to get off scot-free and attack the Catholic Church. She was a New York State Assemblywoman. She's no longer in office. She was voted out. She said a couple of years ago that DiMarzio bribed her $5,000. And she later admitted, well, I was wrong by 3 years where the meeting took place. And she admitted that the meeting never took place where I said it was. And then we found out that every single witness who was at the meeting said that she was a liar, that it never happened. That's the back. Now what we have is last November, Mitchell Garabedian, a lawyer whom I've interacted with, who's one of the most unethical men I've ever met in my life. He is the guy from Spotlight, who Stanley Tucci played in the movie Spotlight. And he's interviewed by Michael Resendez. Michael Resendez happens to be from the Spotlight team of Boston Globe, now works for the Associated Press. He lines up the exclusive story saying that this is the second accusation. The first one is November. Now we have another accusation of a guy who says he was molested at the age of 6 repeatedly. Well, if you were molested at the age of 6 repeatedly, didn't your parents know? Didn't anybody know? Why did it take you a half century to say anything? Now, why is it that when Garabedian threatened a lawsuit against DiMarzio, Bishop DiMarzio of Brooklyn, back in November, he never went through with it? To this day, he's never filed suit. This is all grandstanding. DiMarzio's being set up. They want to smear him. And when his name is cleared legally, as Cardinal Pell from Australia's name was cleared legally, what will remain in the public's mind is the poison. But maybe they were abusers nonetheless.
Bill Donohue, thank you for your perspective. As always, stay safe. You can follow the work of Bill Donohue at the Catholic League. They're at catholicleague.org.